After Walt Disney's death in 1966, Disney's animation department experienced what we can akin to an identity crisis. For the first time since the studio's inception, the animators, producers, and directors were forced to make Disney movies without Disney himself. No doubt they wondered if such a thing could even be accomplished, and this uncertainty reflected in their work. This period of Disney animation, spanning roughly from 1970 to 1988, was marked by a notable downturn in both financial and critical success, with only a few titles bringing in a profit. Many questioned if the Disney animated film was even relevant anymore, as competitors in animation began reigning at the box office, which Disney had not really seen before in its earlier career. This is most certainly a transitory period for Disney, as they tried finding their footing after Walt's passing, but that doesn't mean the 7 films released during this time of change were any less important to the Disney canon, for better or worse. Number 7. The Aristocats. The first film of this era also happens to be the film I liked the least. The last film to be put into production before Walt Disney's death, The Aristocats lacks the heart and soul of the films previous. While I don't think any of the films released up until this point are bad, there is a lot I found frustrating about this film. Firstly is the character Thomas O'Malley. In all honesty, I found him really annoying and just way too smug to be likable. He almost borderlines on creepy. Secondly, I found very few of the characters likable. I found Duchess's and the kitten's aloofness about being kidnapped really unsettling. There's no freak-out moment. They just kinda come out of their basket and say, "Oh look, we've been kidnapped." Where's the fear? Where's the desperation? I just couldn't understand how oddly calm they were about it. Thirdly, the side characters are a lot more enjoyable than the main characters. I touched upon this a bit when talking about Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. Many of the early Disney films had a tendency to focus far too much on side characters and not enough on the main characters. While I enjoyed the dogs and their scenes with the butler were fun to watch, I feel that the time dedicated to the scenes between the two could have been better spent creating more fleshed out main characters. To sum it up, I just found this film pointless. After watching it, I sat back and thought to myself, why was this film made? No, not every film needs to say something or have a grand purpose, but you want to feel as though the film you watched was worthwhile. This film just wasn't for me. The kittens are really cute, and the music is fun, but I think I'll just skip this one from now on. Number 6. Oliver and Company. From the first film in the era to the last, and like the previous film, I had some problems with Oliver and Company as well, though just not as many. Let's get the positives out of the way first. The animation is really nice, bright, and cute. It's really neat seeing a cityscape in a Disney film. This is most certainly one of the most contemporary Disney animated films to date. However, I feel as though the negatives outweigh the positives here. Though the film doesn't spend too much time on extraneous characters, I feel as though they still fail to develop the main characters. Most of them just seem so one-note. Like with Thomas O'Malley, I found Dodger pretty annoying. He was just trying way too hard to be way too cool. The character's forced coolness stunted his growth. He's too cool to be likable. The music, while not too terrible, dates the film incredibly. While it looked fairly modern, the sound immediately lets you know you're watching a movie in the 80s. There's some nice bits of action, so I wouldn't skip it so readily like I would the Aristocats, but it's certainly not my favorite. Next. Number 5. The Fox and the Hound. I have some mixed feelings about The Fox and the Hound. I liked the characters for the most part, especially little Copper and Todd. I really liked their friendship, and I genuinely rooted for them, not to mention just how gosh darn cute they were. However, I felt the film took some odd choices. Firstly, I found most of the songs pretty awful. Secondly, I didn't like the focus on side characters. I can honestly say that I had absolutely no interest if the birds got the worm. Really. All those scenes did was waste time that should have been dedicated to the titular Fox and Hound. And I felt the romantic subplot between Todd and Vixie was completely unneeded and didn't really add anything to the story. Thirdly, I didn't really understand the choice of Todd's owner to let him out into the wild after Copper's owner just threatened her. And lastly, and this is just a personal preference, I think Copper's resentment and search for vengeance against Todd would have been much more impactful and justified had Chief died, rather than just be injured. I will say, though, that the final fight was actually really exciting. It ultimately saved the film for me. There were some things in this movie that worked and some things that didn't. It was a definite mixed bag, but I certainly don't regret seeing it. Number 4. The Black Cauldron. I was curious and somewhat excited going into seeing this film because I know the movie's reputation. On one hand, I know the film is one of Disney's biggest flops, earning it the title of one of the studio's worst. On the other hand, I know that this film has become a cult classic in recent years and has garnered some dedicated fans. In the end, I thought it was just okay. Some of the characters weren't the strongest. In fact, Taran was a pretty bad lead. and I thought the ending was kinda weird. I thought the creators just tried to do too much with the film, and tried to make it dark for darkness' sake. But I thought the animation was really nice and effectively scary. It was, at least, an interesting film to look at. The story itself certainly wasn't the best I'd ever heard, but I found it generally inoffensive. I certainly didn't have a bad time watching this notorious film, but I'm not going to count it as a favorite either. Number 3, The Rescuers. Now we come to the biggest hit of the era. While I have some problems with Rescuers, I generally enjoyed this film. I liked it, but I didn't love it. The strongest part about the film are its leads, Bernard and Miss Bianca. Not only were they really cute, but they were nicely characterized and well fleshed out. I thought their contrasting personalities played well not only off each other, but in terms of the plot too. I also thought the look of the film was quite nice. It's a bit dated and the animation isn't the strongest, but I found it pleasant to look at. The relationship between Medusa and Mr. Snoops is interesting and funny. I definitely appreciated some of the comic relief they provided. Orville and Evinrude are also very cute. Penny I have mixed feelings towards. Some of the times I thought she was cute, some of the times I thought she was just annoying. But I was glad nonetheless when she got a happy ending. The film isn't the most exciting and can be slow at times, but I really did enjoy it and I certainly wouldn't mind watching it again. Number 2, Robin Hood. Looking back, I can't really decide if I liked this film in comparison to the Aristocats or as a film of its own merits. For the sake of this list, let's just go with the latter. This film, if nothing else, was a lot of fun. There weren't any grand statements or lessons to be learned, but I certainly had a great time watching it. Not only was the action pretty well executed, the characters and the performers were spot on. Robin Hood and Prince John, especially, were gems to watch every time they were on the screen. With all that said, there were some things holding this film back that prevented me from putting it at the top. Firstly, the music is a bit touch and go. Some of the songs were fun, but I didn't really find any of them all that great. And secondly, the film used obvious bits of reused animation. There are moments, especially during the dance scene, taken from Snow White, The Jungle Book, and The Aristocats, just to name a few. While I know this film was produced on quite a reduced budget comparatively, the reused animation cheapened it a bit. Other than those complaints, this film was just a good romp to get lost into. It's not a complicated story, but it's an enjoyable one to watch. And number 1, The Great Mouse Detective. Like with The Black Cauldron, I was excited to see this movie going into it. Unlike The Black Cauldron, I knew this film had quite the good reputation, and I certainly was not disappointed. From an era that was such a mixed bag, this film is by far the brightest spot. The story is very tight and only focuses on the characters it has to. The animation was nice and perfectly tone-setting. The songs could easily get stuck in your head, but the greatest part about this movie were the well-fleshed-out, nuanced, likable characters. From Basil to Dawson to Olivia, the leads were all very different and all very enjoyable. You genuinely want to see these characters succeed and get a happy ending. But the crowning jewel is Ratigan. Oh my goodness, he was delicious. Taking cues from Captain Hook and Cruella de Vil, Ratigan was campy to the max and oh so wonderful. The late great Vincent Price took that villain and ran with it to wondrous results. This is the only film in the era I can safely say I loved, and it showed major promise after the various Mrs. Disney produced previously. It was a definite step in the right direction, and a precursor to what was to come. While I did not love this era, I certainly appreciated it for what it was. This period was pretty rough on Disney, but they still were able to churn out some hidden gems alongside their not-so-good efforts. It took them a while to find their footing, but by the end of the 80s, Disney was poised for a comeback, and boy did it come back in a huge way. Join me next time as I take a look at the next era of Disney animation, the Disney Renaissance.